I want to change things up for the next few minutes. You'll see a lot more of this as the next revolution moves along, but I wanted to give you a taste tonight of what we mean by positive populism, how we're going to be fighting elitism and championing the interests of working people. It was one of the main messages of the Trump campaign.
We are going to drain the swamp.
But what is the swamp and why is draining it so important? The swamp is the corrupt web of money and power that the elite have created to make sure that their interests come first. Politicians, lobbyists, advisors, consultants, bureaucrats, technocrats, corporate apparatchiks. From now on, we are going to be on their case in a weekly segment called Swamp Watch. We're going to be holding all these swamp dwellers accountable. I love that. We're going to be holding all these swamp dwellers accountable, as well as the president, for his promise to rein them in. This week, we're focusing on the banks because their tentacles reach throughout our economy and affect everyone's life. In fact, this industry is so consequential that a former editor of The Economist, hardly a left-wing outlet, recently said that banks are, quote, the single biggest cause of rising inequality, distortion of public policy, and generation of collective economic pain and anger. The banking industry has an especially swampy stench because of the revolving door between banks and the government. Here's a case in point. Keith A. Narika was just appointed head of the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. That puts him in charge of regulating the banking industry, an industry he spent his career protecting. Narika worked for years at a prominent law firm where he represented banks, many of which are regulated by the office that he now runs. But that's not enough for this swampy industry. They want to make sure the people at the top of government are on their side too. Bill Clinton appointed Robert Rubin, who spent 26 years at Goldman Sachs, as his Treasury Secretary. George Bush had Hank Paulson, Goldman's former CEO, as his Treasury Secretary. Swampiness, it turns out, is bipartisan. Perhaps one of the most blatantly corrupt examples was the case of President Obama's second Treasury Secretary, Jack Lew. Lew was Chief Operating Officer of Citigroup, where the bank paid him a $900,000 bonus just weeks before he rejoined the federal government in 2009. This is the same Citigroup that had to be bailed out with $45 billion of your money. The putrid swamp is a lush garden for guys like Jack Lew. And before you think President Trump is so far any different, his pick for Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, also worked at Goldman Sachs for many years. Just like half the top team in the White House, or so it seems. But maybe our saving grace is Congress. Surely our elected representatives there put our interests first. Not so much. The House Financial Services Committee regulates the banks. And guess which industry is the biggest donor to members of that committee? The amount of money slushing around this committee has made it highly desirable for any congressman, so much so that it's known on Capitol Hill as the Cash Committee, because sitting on it guarantees, our congressman here is nodding, it's true, because it guarantees fundraising success. What's more, many committee members, not the one here, have direct and close ties to big banks. Representative Steve Stivers was previously the top lobbyist for Bank One. Jim Hines of Connecticut spent 12 years working at Goldman Sachs. Representative Kevin Yoder got $211,000 from the securities and investment industry and another $145,000 from commercial banks in 2 years, 2015 to 2016. It was a good deal for the banks, though. In 2014, Yoder introduced legislation to allow banks to carry out the same practices that some argue caused the financial crash. How lovely for the banks that they have all these members of Congress fighting their corner. And wouldn't it be great if we could come up with some kind of system that would allow working Americans to have their interests represented in government? No, you're right. Let's not ask for the moon. In the meantime, spare a thought for the members of Congress who sit on the Financial Services Committee. So many of them want to be on it that they were getting all squished together, the poor loves. So what did they do? Choose the members who are best placed to pass wise legislation to regulate the banks? No, they just added extra rows of seats. That is this week's Swamp Watch.